Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory, where hearty discussion of all things TV draws a smart circle around lessons of leadership, persistence, and achievement. Every time you tune in, you'll find fresh perspective and dots that are connected to reveal just how powerful TV is to women and how important it is that we're represented. I bring this to you from my vantage point as a public relations and marketing consultant, as an adjunct professor, and as a lifelong student of TV. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Oh wait, find this podcast at Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Libsyn, Google Play, and Auto Radio. Engage with us on Twitter. Our handle is @TV Herstory. Okay, on with the show. A big deal in TV herstory went down on September 20th, 1973, at the Houston Astrodome. We at Advanced TV Herstory are not asking you to cause a family kerfuffle at Thanksgiving, but if you wanted to, and talking about politics and religion is verboten, here's a little background that'll put you on a level playing field with, say, any woman of the older generation who's sitting at the table. Because who knows what kind of an answer you'll get when you ask the question of men or women at the table, so what did you think of the battle of the sexes? But if you like your holidays quiet instead, then enjoy this installment merely for its educational value. Think of it as something you should know about the power of TV, assessing risk, and maintaining composure. For to understand the significance of the battle of the sexes, that is to say, the tennis match between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, is to realize that big events demand storytelling in order to stay alive. If no one talks about them, how do we really know the impact, even 42 years later?
I love tennis very much. I wanted it to change ever since I started in the sport. I thought it was just for the rich and just for the white. And ever since that day when I was 11 years old and I wasn't allowed in a photo because I wasn't wearing a tennis skirt, I knew then that I wanted to change the sport. And tonight, a lot of non-tennis people saw tennis for the first time. I don't even care what kind of match it was.
The Battle of the Sexes, as it was called, was the most watched, best attended tennis match in history. It was a spectacle in many respects and proved to be the turning point in the women's movement when Billie Jean King transformed into something known as Mother Freedom. Because she was a woman unlike so many others associated with the movement, most notably Gloria Steinem. Billie Jean King had no connections to Vietnam protests or bra burnings. She looked and sounded normal. She was married. She was an athlete, but not too aggressive in the eyes of the media and the world. So the airing of the Battle of the Sexes placed Billie Jean King at a pulpit for equality that she would use time and again, literally through every decade until now. And she's still fighting. Whether that was to retain the core of Title IX, the federal legislation regarding access to education and equitable facilities, which has come under attack by higher education as well as policymakers through the years, or advocating for equal pay for professional women athletes, Billie Jean King has been there time and again. So here's the story, told very quickly, and it's not just a story of women's tennis, as much as the factors that led up to this incredible televised sports spectacle. Actually, Billie Jean King was the second woman tennis player Bobby Riggs cajoled into playing him on national TV. It didn't turn out well for Team Woman. Margaret Court, a reigning tennis star, had traditional upbringing and a traditional conservative life and also was married, and she even had a child. Margaret Court and Billie Jean differed in opinions on many different things, including the equity issues that Billie Jean saw in women's tennis with regard to pay and opportunity. And Margaret Court did not apply herself to the commercial side of women's athletics, spending time with fans and sponsors, and doing the legwork necessary to really build the foundation of women's tennis, as Billie Jean has done. What you need to know about Bobby Riggs is that he had been a big name at Wimbledon in 1939, having risen up through the men's tennis ranks as a bit of an outcast. His size, his look, his athletic awkwardness was not embraced by the most influential tennis promoters of the day, and Riggs found tennis to be an intellectual challenge as well as a physical challenge, and it also fit nicely with his penchant for gambling. But he was a bit of an outcast, and some would say he had a chip on his shoulder, in addition to being a bit of a huckster or flim-flam man. And it's in her book, A Necessary Spectacle, Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs, and the Tennis Match That Leveled the Game, published by Crown Publishing of New York, that the New York Times sports columnist Selena Roberts does a great job of describing the lengths that Bobby Riggs would go to hustle people, to bet on events, and come across as a total huckster. Roberts' book is really an excellent, quick, readable read, and she does a great job not only of giving you important background on Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, but of telling the story of the match as well, and how they came to even be friends after the match. So in the spring of 1973, well past 50 years of age and 2 decades past his tennis prime, Riggs decided to attempt a big event comeback. It was spurred in part by his wanting to redirect a claim for bigger winnings for women, which was really starting to make the headlines, thanks to Billie Jean King, over to bigger winnings for senior men of the tennis circuit. And as Roberts documents throughout her book, he genuinely believed he was a better tennis player than any woman. So when Riggs and his promoters dangled in front of Margaret Court, she took the bait. Having given little thought, according to King's recount in the book, to the larger context of women's athletics, the women's movement, and what a loss would mean. Or, as she told reporters, "I've beaten better men than Bobby in practice matches." For women from earlier generations, the accepted sports available to them were golf and tennis. More than ever, TVs were not only commonplace in the homes of America's baby boom teenagers, but they were also in color. Technology was making it possible to broadcast games live, or at least package them for a taped broadcast later. So remember, it was about 1972, and between the signing of Title IX federal legislation and the ERA and its campaign for full passage across the country of all the states, ratification, tennis was all the rage, being a woman was all the rage, and really starting to break through was important. And Margaret Court was recognized as one of the best women players in the game. And throughout 1973, Billie Jean King finally reached her pinnacle. So Bobby Riggs had trained seriously to play against Margaret Court, playing daily with his son, but also living a pretty unhealthy lifestyle. In the days and weeks leading up to the first big match, which would take place on Mother's Day, 1973, Riggs established a pattern of taunting, trash-talking, and not only focusing on his opponent, but women athletes and women as a gender. King knew, upon learning of the match, that Court was nowhere near the inner circle of feminism or promotion. She had no context for Riggs's antics. And for a whole host of reasons, including Riggs's having successfully psyched out Margaret Court, who some could say easily was thrown mentally during a game, the entire match lasted only 57 minutes. This is all recounted in Roberts' book. So on national TV, on Mother's Day, Riggs handed Court a bouquet of flowers and told her she was a beautiful mother. She curtsied. Less than an hour later, Riggs had trounced Margaret Court in 2 sets. From the moment after he beat Court, Riggs was putting out the public call to Billie Jean King for a match. Billie Jean King, with her own healthy ego and place in the women's movement, and a husband who was becoming a consummate promoter, she realized the only thing she could do was to take him on.
A woman can beat Bobby Riggs, so I really feel the responsibility is in my corner at this particular moment.
While Riggs's trash-talking and media antics got the better of Margaret Court, King got a handle on her game and game plan for her off-court and on-court preparation. She was taking this very seriously. In a sense, this was something she knew had been in her path her entire life. As Roberts recounts in her book, Billie told her mother at the age of 5 that she was, quote, going to do something great with her life, end quote. And her number had just been called by a 55-year-old loudmouth, Riggs.
The male is king, the male is supreme. I've said it over and over again. I still feel that way. Girls play a nice game of tennis for girls.
Billie's rise through the tennis ranks started in her teen years. She had paid her dues to get where she was, which was now world ranked. She had played her first match at Wimbledon in 1961. So by 1973, Billie Jean King was a tested veteran of the road, media, and the entire tennis industry, both the men's and the women's side. The business end of tournaments, as they were open to amateurs and professionals, had changed in the last 5 years. And all of this activity was coming at a time when women were taking their rightful place in athletics and physical fitness, all because of Title IX. Billie Jean King's acceptance of the match with Riggs meant reclaiming the progress and rightful place of highly trained women athletes all across sports. She had to undo what Margaret Court had allowed to have happen. And it would also serve to put women tennis players on more equal footing for pay, venues, product endorsements, tournament sponsors, and media exposure. There was everything to gain and everything to lose. And at this point in her career, she had attained much of what was available. But since 1970, the presence of teen superstar Chris Evert was changing the exposure equation and the game itself. Billie Jean's role in the women's movement was becoming one of veteran with a voice.
Women can be great athletes, and I think you'll find in the next decade, women athletes will finally get the attention that they've deserved through the years, that people will respect us as athletes and not just whether we're good looking and whether she's cute. We're changing.
And she says they're going to scrape me off the court of the Astrodome, and I claim it's going to be her they're going to scrape off. So that's what it's all about, and it is going to be the battle of the sexes. Don't anybody let you tell you it's any different.
So in 1973, with Court's loss to Riggs in May, Billie Jean waited until June to give Riggs the answer he sought. She was scheduled to be at Wimbledon in July, so promoters set the date for September. Oh, and by the way, this Wimbledon ultimately featured Billie Jean against Chris Evert in the final. This is huge TV history because so many women and young men were influenced by watching these two strong women on TV. So as Roberts describes the deal, the contract called for the best of 5 sets match at Billie's request and at ABC's need to fill time with a $100,000 winner-take-all purse plus $150,000 in ancillary rights. So when you think about the fact that Billie Jean strategically called for it to be a 5-set match, she knew the endurance that it would take, the level of training, and significantly younger than Bobby Riggs, she knew that she probably had an advantage if the whole match went long. There were no grand assurances that Billie Jean King would win, and in fact her peers on the tennis circuit questioned her ability to beat Riggs. The betting world was posting all sorts of odds, generally in favor of Bobby Riggs. And with everything on the line, the event had a larger value.
Women have reacted fantastically well. The women come up to me. And what it did for them is it gave them courage and self-confidence to ask for what they want and need, for instance, let's say a raise. For the men, I get men coming up to me in their late 40s, 50s, 60s, and they were young when they saw this. And they start getting tears in their eyes because they go, that match really affected me as a young boy. They go, I have a daughter now, and I want my sons and my daughters to have equal opportunity. And when they say that to me, I am so happy.
But people forget, getting back to the women, 1973, and I was shocked to learn this, women couldn't even get credit cards without the signature of a man.
Male. Yeah, we had to co-sign with somebody.
So Rosie says if you lost, that she believes it would have set women back 20 years.
I totally agree. No.
Really?
Oh.
I mean, that much?
Oh, you're so young, you don't realize, you don't know you can't get the flavor of what was going on. There were marriages that happened because of that match. There was 100 million people in the world saw that. That was a lot in those days.
How concerned were you about its impact on Title IX had you lost?
Very. In fact, I was more worried about that.
Why?
Because I wanted the hearts and minds to start. Okay, you can have legislation, but if people don't believe it in their hearts and minds, they'll get around it. And they're still trying to get around it, okay? Girls' high school today, right today, it's exactly where the boys were in 1971 and 72. Okay? People think we've caught up. We're not caught up. We're not even close. We're at 75. I told you, 77 cents on the dollar. When I played Bobby Riggs, we're at 59 cents on the dollar. Women of color even make less than that, okay?
It's hard today to imagine an athlete as crucial to a sport and movement as Billie Jean was to tennis. There were more women's voices her age and stature in music and Hollywood, for instance, and even in politics. By virtue of age and experience, she was at the top with few peers in the tennis world. And women's tennis and golf today has broadened its base internationally. Venus and Serena Williams are important to the game. They sell tickets and merchandise when they are in a tournament. but it wouldn't be canceled without them. And that's the way it was back in the early 70s with Billie Jean King and some of the other big names in tennis. Unbeknownst to nearly everyone, Riggs did not maintain his practice and conditioning regimen leading up to his match with King as he had done for court. He focused on promotions and making the most of endorsement opportunities that would come at the match and after he won. The hustle seemed to become his number one priority, whereas the world got to see Billie Jean King and Chris Evert at Wimbledon display incredible athletic prowess. So heading into the match, Billie Jean King knew that this would be a historic day, and following her performance at Wimbledon, she planned the details of her schedule and diet, her hair, her tennis dress, and her shoes. And she also battled for 3 weeks behind the scenes to ensure that an aging tennis star, Jack Kramer, who was heavily biased toward Bobby Riggs, would not be part of the on-air commentary team.
That they had to think that we can do things, that we can actually walk and chew gum at the same time. And I wanted to make sure the tour continued. And I knew we were going to get humongous exposure. I knew it was going to just touch the hearts and minds. I knew people were going to go crazy. They did. I knew they were going to get crazy, and they did. They're making bets. You're too young, but they were making bets. It was like a Super Bowl. Right. It was worse.
When you apparently seclude yourself for a while leading up to the match, because I guess you wanted to make yourself comfortable with just beating a man. But what do you recall from that actual match?
Not a lot.
Commentators, athletes, and celebrities, everybody got a piece of airtime to weigh in with who they thought would win. And this is the part where it would be interesting to find out what your family thought, or your friends. The majority favored Riggs. With production quality worthy of a Super Bowl halftime, King and Riggs camped it up as they entered the Astrodome that evening. King was carried in on a litter carried by strapping young men, like Cleopatra, and Riggs was pulled in a rickshaw by his team of heavily endowed women known as the Bosom Buddies. The match was more than Riggs had ever expected. King's training and conditioning paid off. Her attention to maintaining an even mental keel kept her focused, while his antics and frustrations posed distractions. Roberts describes it in the book as a really painful thing to watch toward the end because Riggs struggled so much. She faltered occasionally, only to regain her footing and overpower him in every aspect of the game. Even Howard Cosell, who was ABC's #1 guy in the booth for this event, who had begun the broadcast really quite dismissive of Billie Jean's tennis skills and her prowess, increasingly articulated respect for her as the match wore on. It was that obvious. The final score in the best of 5 was she only had to take it to 3 sets, and that was 6-4, 6-3, 6-3. Riggs wasn't close in any of the sets.
Howard Cosell was the lead commentator.
And the second serve ball. There is no good time for a double fault, but there can be a disastrous time, and that may have been it.
Third match point.
Fault. Behave like a perfect gentleman. And so this is what it's come down to here in the Houston Astrodome. The long-awaited match, hustled and promoted ceaselessly and shrewdly by Bobby Riggs. Excitement engendered all over the country as Billie Jean hugs her husband Larry King. It began to become a cause célèbre. Equality for women, equal rights. It was Billie Jean who fought for equal pay for women in the U.S. Open tennis tournament and got it.
King maintained her classiness after the win and went on to become one of the highest-profile women heroes of the 20th century. Riggs's career as a tennis player and hustler dried up after the match. Chris Evert had no intention of playing him at a third circus. At least in the world of tennis, one woman had fought the battle and won.
Billie Jean King has been running him over the court. And that's been her principal tactic, to wear him down.
Oh, I was so relieved. I was so happy.
The winner of the Battle of the Sexes. Billie Jean King.
That night it wasn't about tennis, it was about history and it was about social change.
With all the tools of communication around us, sometimes we forget just how powerful TV can be. And so going back to 1973 to really understand the risk that Billie Jean King took in putting her entire career on the line, maintaining her composure through a circus that she did not have the support networks around her that we would think of today for an event of this magnitude. And where that took us on the national stage is really astounding, and it is a story that needs to be told. There are plenty of resources available online that tell this story in multimedia fashion, and I am grateful that Selena Roberts, back in 2005, took the time to write a book called A Necessary Spectacle, Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs, and the Tennis Match That Leveled the Game. It's published by Crown Publishing. I also pulled from video available on YouTube by Graham Bensinger some audio, specifically the interviews with Billie Jean King. Learn more about Graham's work interviewing important people at grahambensinger.com. And also, we pulled a little audio of the Cosell commentary from the audio compilation of historic sporting events narrated by Bob Costas, and that is called And the Crowd Goes Wild. Thank you very much for listening to this installment of Advanced TV Herstory. You just never know where our TV herstory storytelling is going to take us. I hope you enjoyed this one. Stay tuned. We've got more in the queue. Thanks. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.